Hello everyone, hello class. How are you? This is Dr. Kevin, and today we're having our lecture on Introduction to Philosophy, Fee 1301 155031. The question has always been that we keep asking people, and people keep asking us, what is this huge masquerade called philosophy, right? And sometimes we find it like hard, difficult to arrive at what we can say is philosophy. And philosophy has been there for a long period of time. As a matter of fact, since mankind came to be. Different people, different cultures, different generations, different religions have different perspectives and views about this big entity called philosophy. And now we are looking at philosophy as a discipline, as a course. But we're also going to look at philosophy as that which has been part of humanity, part of human life, before it moved into being a discipline for human research and study. What could this philosophy then be? Philosophy as a way of life, the way humans live, the way humans interact, the way humans see the world and their beliefs, the way they see the wonders in the universe and their lifestyle, the things that happen to them. Philosophy, looking from philosophy and a philosophy from that approach has been there from the beginning of time. As long as humans were living, were existing, they were living and existing within a philosophy of life, within a mindset, within a scope of thinking. So philosophy as a way of life has always been. But then, with time, philosophy moved into being a scientific discipline, open for research and discoveries. And in that regard, we're looking at philosophy from how did it start? This kind of philosophy that has become a discipline. How did it begin? Like I said earlier, different generations and different cultures and different people have different philosophies. But this systematic discipline called philosophy, we are looking at it from where it began. And it began with wonder. Wonder. To wonder about the beauties of the world. To wonder about the mysteries in the world. To wonder about the things that happen in human existence. Things like, why do we do what we do? Why do we give birth? And then, after a while, die? Why do we have seasons? Why do we have the sun suspended up? Why do we have rainfalls? These questions opened the avenue of wonder. And so, we have this wonder being traced to Greece. A systematic approach to this wonder was traced to Greece. And it began with two poets. Two poets in Greece. This philosophy that began with these two poets, the concept, the notion of this philosophy as a discipline is traceable to a Greek origin. And in Greek, philosophy is derived from two Greek words. Philos, which means love, and Sophia, which means wisdom. So literally, philosophy is the love of wisdom, generally speaking. What this means is, when a human wonders about the mysteries of things, or the things that happen around him, or the experiences of life that he or she is experiencing, and has this love to search deep, to get the answer, to have the knowledge, purified knowledge, a knowledge that has been put into practice, that comes out to become wisdom, that person is simply practicing philosophy. He or she is philosophizing. So philosophy is already innate. It's in the inside. Because every human thinks. Every human philosophizes. Every human wonders. With the stages of human growth, at the level in which a human begins to think and to wonder independently, at that stage, that human is philosophizing, has become a philosopher king or a philosopher queen. And that level of philosophy is a level in which the human is showing love in wisdom. Because the one that opens the doors for more questionings, for more search, in order to get the answer to what is happening, what has happened, and what will happen. That becomes the love of wisdom. And so, philosophy, as a general definition, can simply be said to be a critical and rigorous search. Critical and rigorous search for the fundamental causes of all things. A search for the fundamental causes of all things, with a view to finding a solution to things that are problems. So philosophy is a search, a critical search to the fundamental problems, fundamental causes of problems, of issues that we humans experience in our lives, fundamental causes of things that happen in the universe and that are still happening and that has happened, with a view to finding a solution to them for those that are the problems. Philosophy has 4 distinct stages of its development. The first stage is the ancient period of philosophy. And this ancient period of philosophy started soon after these Greek poets philosophized on what they think, what they thought was the cause and the origin of all things in the world and in the universe. We have these 2 distinct poets in philosophy who actually opened the door for philosophizing. And these 2 poets are Homer and Hesiod. They existed way, 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 way back around 395 BC in Greece. And what they had this poem they wrote. Each of them wrote his poem. Homer wrote the Iliad. Hesiod wrote Theogony. Homer also wrote another poem which he called the Odyssey. Of course, we do not know much about these ancient poets in Greece because they did not write anything by themselves. What we know about them is what other writers wrote about them. And so, what did Homer say? That triggered the fancy of every other person to look into what he said. Homer said, the Greek poet, that the gods, the Greek gods, as it once was, we are fully responsible for everything that happens in the universe and, of course, what happens in human existence. The gods were interfering, and in their interference, when humans live beyond a moderate level of virtue, above it, when they live an excessive life that is outside the wage and the weight of morality, the gods will intervene with a kind of punishment for a wrong lifestyle. So, what does this mean? When a human being exhibits a kind of pride, excessive pride, to a point that the pride is affecting the general good of everyone else, Homer, the Greek poet, says the gods will intervene and bring a kind of punishment on that human being as a reparation for the pride. And so, they were responsible for sicknesses, infidelity, famine. Those were ways they were giving out punishments to human beings because they were doing wrong. They weren't doing right. Nonetheless, Homer presented these gods in a way that it looked, we can't revere them, we can't respect them. They are not even worthy of it. Why? Because Homer gave a picture of these gods as being deceitful and as committing adultery. And these qualities are not moral qualities. So these gods could commit adultery, these gods could be deceitful, and of course these are not pretty good moral qualities. So these gods wouldn't have any moral courage to intervene in the activities of humans when they are doing the same thing. This was the picture that Homer gave about these gods. Homer and Hesiod looked at it from that perspective. Soon after the period of these poets, Homer and Hesiod, who gave the picture of the world being controlled by these gods, came the first ancient Greek philosopher, and his name is Thales. Thales happened to be the first Greek philosopher. And how did he get to that stage? There is this town in Greece called Miletus. And this town called Miletus, it's wealthy. It has a lot of resources, and the environment is good for commerce. So people were coming from neighboring cities far and wide to Miletus for commerce and businesses. So when they get into Miletus, and Miletus in Greece is in Greece, they will exchange cosmopolitan ideas, and they will have commerce, they will have businesses. During their leisure, they will begin to wonder about the mysteries, about the things they don't understand about the world, about their lives, about human existence. They sit down together, perhaps over a cup of tea, and begin to wonder, why is the earth filled with so much water in it? Why do we have day and have night? Why are people born today and after a while they die? And then when they die, more people are born and then more people die. And the cycle keeps going like that. Why do we have these things that happen? Why do we have earthquakes? Why do we have tsunami? Why do we have natural causes of things that happen which humans cannot do anything about it? They wonder about everything. They thought about everything. That wonder is the birth of philosophy. And so Thales came up to disagree with the ancient poets, Greek and Homer, in giving the picture that everything, the basic substance of everything that happens in the universe, in the world, is credited to the gods, to the Greek gods. For Thales, he sees water as the basic fundamental substance of all things. There is a shift from Thales, between Thales and the Greek poets. The Greek poets were given a picture of a divine, a supernatural being, the Greek gods, as responsible for all the activities in the universe. But when Thales came on board, he had a shift from this divine view of responsibility, that is responsible for everything that happens in the world. Thales moved into an independent thinking. And so he began to look at the world as an individual from an independent viewpoint. For him, the fundamental substance of all things is water. And how did he arrive at that? Thales says, everything we can think of, every physical object, every physical material we can think of, and circumstances that happen in the universe, in the world that we can think of, happen because of water. His argument is that water has three basic stages, states and changes and forms in which every other thing exists in. Water has the solid state, which happens when it freezes. When water freezes, it becomes solid. Water has the liquid state, the liquid form of it, which we see, like the flowing rivers and the flowing oceans in liquid form. Water has the gaseous stage, which happens when you boil it, or when the temperature is so hot, so high, then it evaporates. When it evaporates, it turns into vapor and becomes gas. And for Thales, he has looked around the much he could, as at the time he existed, and the things he could see them from the eyes of these three distinct stages of water. He could see things from the eyes of being solid. He could see things from the eyes of being in liquid form. He could see things from the eyes of being in gaseous form. And so he arrives at the conclusion that water is responsible for all things. Now we will have to understand that this move Thales did in order to discredit the ancient poets of Greece. This Homer, the Greek poet, and this Hesiod, the Greek poet. These are the two Greek poets that existed as at the time of the beginning of philosophy. These were the two Greek poets that were relating everything that humans did to the gods, Homer and Hesiod. And after they are dead and gone, philosophy moved beyond speculation, beyond that view of looking at everything that happens in the world coming from the gods. Although it shaped and reshaped the human thinking, the human mindset, for humans to begin to dig deep into what is responsible for all things, what is the fundamental cause of all things. And that's when we find this city of Miletus a very important city where philosophy began. We see Miletus right here. This is the birthplace of philosophy. This is where philosophy was born, the birthplace of philosophy. And people were coming from different cities down here in Miletus, because this Miletus was good for commerce and businesses. We see the neighboring cities close by Miletus. People could move from Athens and they could go all the way, cross the sea, down to the ancient Miletus. People moved from Mykonos all the way down to Miletus. Andros. People crossed the sea down to Miletus for businesses, for commerce. And so Miletus was prospering. And philosophy was born. And so when this great philosopher Thales came on board, he moved the mindset. It is no more about the Greek gods of Homer and Hesiod. It is no more about the Greek gods of these great poets. It was now moved to independent human thinking. And that became a shift, a huge shift on the altar of philosophy. Soon after Thales, a contemporary of Thales, and as a matter of fact, his pupil, called Anaximander, came on board on the philosophy table. He brought up his own philosophy. And he began as well to think independently. Unlike Thales, who looked at the world from the perspective of water being the fundamental thing of all things. Which water we know is a physical thing that we can see, we can touch, we can feel. Thales gave the fundamental stuff of all things to something that is physical, that we can touch, we can feel, and we can see. But the pupil of Thales, who is Anaximander, sees a completely different thing. He doesn't see anything physical as to be the fundamental stuff of all things. For Anaximander, he says that the fundamental thing of all things is the apeiron. Apeiron is a Greek word that means infinite, boundless, limitless. So for Anaximander, the fundamental stuff of all things is boundless. It's infinite. We can't touch it. We can't see it. It's not physical, unlike the water of Thales. And how did Anaximander arrive at this conclusion? He postulates, and he postulated, that if, for example, we say that the fundamental thing of all things must be X, which is physical, then X must have a prior beginning, which is W. And then W must have a prior beginning, which is Z. And then Z must have a prior beginning, which is Y. And Y must have a prior beginning, which is P. You see? So now it goes like that. It goes on and on and on and on and on. So whatever is must have a prior beginning. And that which has that prior beginning has in itself also a prior beginning. And whatever is that which also has a prior beginning has another prior beginning. And it keeps going and going and going. And so Anaximander posed the question, for how long will these prior beginnings keep going until we get to the point of the fundamental stuff of all things? At what point we will get to and we say, oh, this has no prior beginning. And because it has no prior beginning, it is the fundamental stuff of all things, from which every other thing comes. Then Anaximander came up with saying, the only thing that cannot have a prior beginning is boundless, is infinite. It's apeiron. So for Anaximander, the basic substance of all things is boundless. Every other thing that exists from and out of the infinite. We can't see the infinite. We can't touch the infinite. Anaximander has moved the line of thinking of philosophy to a completely different realm. Thales talked about getting to the most important, the fundamental things of all things in human existence and in the universe through the sense of sight, feeling, through sense perception, as a matter of fact, through what we can see, what we can touch, what we can feel. Thales was able to get to that knowledge that the fundamental thing of all things is from sense perception. But Anaximander sees the fundamental thing of all things from reasoning, what we can't see, from things that is beyond the human eyes. He becomes the first ancient philosopher to look at reality from a metaphysical perspective. Because boundless is metaphysical. There is no physical entity that is boundless. It's a concept that exists in the mind. It's a physiomentis, figment of the mind. And because it's something that exists in the mind, that has no physical evidence of proof, it becomes metaphysical. So Anaximander can rightly be said to be the first person who moved philosophy from looking at things in the universe from a physical perspective to a metaphysical perspective. Friends, with a tremendous slowness in the vastness of time, philosophy continued to evolve. In human knowledge, human thinking continued to broaden. Human opinions continued to expand. One thing we must recognize is the fact that every philosopher that comes after one philosopher had postulated a theory, most of the time, more often than not, most of the time is reacting to what has been said before. What his predecessor said. Every philosophy and every philosopher begins with a response to what a previous philosopher has said or has postulated. And that is the growth of human knowledge. That is the growth of philosophizing. So after our friend Anaximander was done with his postulation, we had another great philosopher, Xenophanes. That is his name. Xenophanes. We must remember that these philosophers were all born in Miletus in Greece. Remember, I had already said why Miletus is the birthplace of philosophy, because it was a place of commerce, and people could come from different parts of the world to stay in Miletus for business, for commerce. And during their leisure, they began to think, bring up cosmopolitan ideas, and then began to reason and think critically into what could be the cause of all things in the universe. And that is why Miletus is the birthplace of philosophy. So Xenophanes was born in Colophon, which is pretty close to Miletus. But his philosophy was not so much so like that of Thales and Anaximander. Xenophanes' philosophy was more on criticizing the philosophy of the ancient poets, the philosophy of Homer and Hesiod. These poets, remember, had already given the reference made it clear, referred to the gods, the Greek gods, Zeus, Moses, these gods and goddesses of the Greek people. Homer and Hesiod had already said that these were responsible for everything that happens to human life. They were interfering and intervening in the activities of mankind. But Xenophanes disagrees with this. For Xenophanes, these Greek gods cannot be in a position to give moral standards. Why? Because Homer had already presented these Greek gods in a wrong light. Homer had already given a picture, an impression of Greek gods that are not worthy of our reverence, that are not worthy of our respect. Because according to him, these Greek gods were found in deceit. They could deceive. They could have be seen, be involved in adultery. And Xenophanes cannot understand why, if these gods are pictured in this light, on what grounds would they as well make a moral judgment over the activities of humans? So Xenophanes criticized the work of Homer and Hesiod by saying that Homer and Hesiod presented these gods in a way that they lacked merit of trust and respect. And that shouldn't be so. And that was wrong. It shouldn't be so. Because these gods, as a matter of fact, should have been given that picture of respect. And we'll even find the critique of the work of Homer and Hesiod in the work of Plato in his book Republic. To the point that Plato said the works of Homer and Hesiod cannot be taught to children in his ideal state. Why? Because a wrong picture of the gods was given. This became the philosophy of Xenophanes. So he didn't want to go the route of praise of the work of Homer and Hesiod. No, he went the route of criticizing their work for not doing a good job. We have so many other ancient philosophers and their philosophies over time. But these philosophies and philosophers existed within different stages of the growth of philosophy. Thales, Anaximander, Xenophanes, and many other philosophers were philosophers that existed within the ancient period of philosophy. And that is the first stage in the growth of philosophy. After the ancient period of philosophy, philosophy evolved into the medieval period. In the medieval period, we see philosophers having a confluence, a union between theology and philosophy. We see philosophers begin to bring in God in the discourse of the fundamental cause of all things in the universe. We begin to see faith playing a role in figuring out, in finding out what is responsible for all things. What is it upon which every other thing comes out of? What controls every other thing? And so we find philosophers like Augustine. We find philosophers like Thomas Aquinas. We see philosophers like Anselm. And most of these philosophers were Christian philosophers. And they were trying to give a picture of the Christian God being responsible for all things, and to whom, by whom, and from whom all things happen. So faith and reason had a confluence, had a union in the medieval period of philosophy. So where reason couldn't go, faith moved the human mind to that extent. At the point where reason would stop, faith moved on the vehicle outside reason to its destination. To the destination of finding the truth. To the destination of this wisdom that philosophy is. The love of wisdom. So in the medieval period, faith was playing a huge role for humans to arrive at this wisdom. And philosophers were always bringing in theology, the study of God, theology, in the medieval period of philosophy. After the medieval period of philosophy, philosophy moved into another state and another stage, another level of development, which is the modern period. In the modern period of philosophy, it was a change, a reshaping of human mind, human thought, human reasoning. Now there is this little gap between the medieval period and the modern period. This little gap is called the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a time period when the human mind was reshaped in total. Human thinking was reshaped. Now, what is this reshaping? The reshaping was that humans began to look at philosophy from a scientific perspective, from a scientific point of view. In the ancient period, humans were using mythology to describe the fundamental things, to explain, to prove the fundamental thing of all things, the fundamental stuff of all things. Those were myths, mythology. In the medieval period, the individual, the human being, was using reason, but where reason couldn't go far, the much reason could go, the human being, the human person, the individual, these philosophers that existed within that time frame used faith. They just believed. They couldn't think no further. They couldn't think no more. And so what happened? Oh, okay, we just believe. It's God. And that was what reigned supreme within that period, within that state, within that realm, within that period of philosophy. So when philosophy moved into the modern period, through the Renaissance, philosophy now began to look at the realities of life from a perspective of science, from a scientific point of view. Philosophy now began to dig deep. Philosophy began to look into the genetics of human existence. This is the period where we find great philosophers of science like Thomas Hobbes. And so many other scientific philosophers that existed within that era. Philosophy as a discipline now became the foundation of all other disciplines. Medicine, biology, physics, mathematics, all these other disciplines came out of philosophy. Because now people are beginning to think. Philosophy is digging deep, is moving into sciences. It has opened the doors. It has opened the great doors. The ancient doors has been open for people to come in and think and reason and come up with solutions to problems. And discoveries began to happen with the vehicle of science. People began to discover things, different kinds of things. Now, as the human mind continued to develop, and as philosophy continued to grow, philosophy moved into the fourth stage of its development. Now, this fourth stage is the contemporary stage of philosophy. In this stage, philosophy began to discourse about the individual that is philosophizing. The man, the male that is philosophizing, the female that is philosophizing. Philosophy was now talking about the human person. It was no more about the fundamental cause of all things, as in the days of Thales and Homer. It was no more about the vehicle of theology to get at the wisdom as the truth in the medieval period. It was no more reason, philosophy, and theology, faith, coming together to arrive at the truth in the medieval era. Science was also implied in the contemporary era, but more so, it was about the human being. The human being. The human being became the subject matter of discussion in the contemporary period of philosophy. And so philosophers began to discuss about existential issues, things of real life. And that's when schools of thought like existentialism was born in the history of philosophy. And the discussion now became existence and essence. Which one comes first? Between existence and essence, which comes first? Do I have to exist in order to be? Or am I already and then I will exist? Now philosophy began to broaden its tentacles, its scope of reasoning. And this contemporary period in which the human being is a point of discussion is the period in which we are living hic et nunc, here and now. That's the stage. That's the period of philosophy. And that is the stage. That's the period of philosophy in which we are now. In which the human individual is a point of discussion. And then this human individual spreads the tentacle of research into the sciences, into history, into culture, into religion. Different aspects, different ways of getting to the truth of the fundamental cause of all things. The primary aim of philosophy is to arrive at truth through the vehicle of wisdom. And this wisdom is knowledge put into practice. And this knowledge this knowledge begins by thinking, by reasoning, by making use of the human thinking faculty. Rigorous, critical thinking. And when this truth is found, even though in philosophy there are more questions than answers, as a matter of fact, the more you bring up answers in somebody else's question, the more there will be questions for the answer that has been brought on the table. So philosophy becomes an ever ongoing discourse. It is not like mathematics that we have 1 + 1 = 2, and that's it, period. That's it, period. 1 + 1 = 2. That's period, that's it. Philosophy is not like that. When you give an answer in philosophy, the answer that you have given opens the door for more questions. And so it becomes a continuous discourse to make our opinions about life better and to drive us closest to attaining the truth of the fundamental cause of all things in the universe and in human existence. This is the beauty of philosophy. And this is the joy of philosophizing. It is at this point that we'll come to the end of today's class. I wish you all the best. Goodbye and stay safe.